My neighbor built a retaining wall over my property line, so I let the county inspector measure it in public. The first thing I noticed was the wall, not a fence, not a row of decorative stones, not a temporary construction barrier, a wall. Gray concrete blocks stretched across the back edge of my yard, as if someone had dropped a new border there overnight and decided my property line no longer mattered. The mortar was still dark from the rain. Gravel had been packed behind the blocks, and the base of the structure had crushed half of my flower bed into the mud. I stood barefoot beneath the small roof over my patio, staring through the rain and trying to understand why my backyard suddenly looked smaller. Then I saw the water. It was pouring from a black drainage pipe behind the wall, running directly into my lawn and spreading toward the patio. Mud moved with it. Mulch floated in dark clumps. One of my sprinkler heads had been snapped off, and the soil around my maple tree had been scraped away far enough to expose a thick root. That was when Grant Whitaker stepped onto his upper lawn. His property sat slightly higher than mine, and he stood above the wall with a travel mug in one hand, admiring the construction like a man inspecting a new swimming pool. He looked proud. Worse, he looked completely unsurprised to see me standing beside the damage. I demanded to know why his retaining wall was on my property. Grant said the wall followed the slope and stabilized the ground. According to him, I should have been grateful because his project was protecting both houses from erosion. I pointed at the crushed flowers, the broken sprinkler line, the exposed root, and the drainage pipe sending water toward my patio. Grant dismissed every part of it. The plants could be replaced, the sprinkler could be repaired, the soil had always been unstable, the water had always moved downhill. Then he said nobody used that narrow strip of land anyway. That sentence told me everything. He knew the land was mine. He simply believed it was not important enough for me to defend. A few minutes later, Linda Carver, the president of our homeowners association, arrived through the side gate carrying a black umbrella. She spoke in the controlled, patient tone she used whenever she wanted someone to feel emotional and unreasonable. She explained that Grant had submitted an exterior improvement request. The HOA had approved a landscape wall intended to improve erosion control and neighborhood appearance. She warned me that interfering with an approved project could create liability if the slope became unstable. I looked at the water spreading across my patio and realized they had already prepared the story they wanted everyone to believe. Grant was improving the neighborhood. The contractor was controlling erosion. The HOA was protecting property values. And I was the difficult homeowner standing in the way. What none of them understood was that the county inspector would later stand in front of half the neighborhood, place an official measurement beside that wall, and confirm two facts in public. The wall crossed my property line, and it was not even the wall Grant had permission to build. My backyard was the reason I bought the house. It was not large or impressive. It did not have a pool, an outdoor kitchen, a stone fireplace, or the kind of elaborate patio people displayed in real estate listings. It was a modest, sloped yard behind a two-story home in a quiet subdivision. There was a small maple tree near one side, a narrow flower bed along the rear slope, and enough grass for a lawn chair and a cup of coffee. But when I first saw it, I could imagine living there. For years, I had rented apartments where every outdoor space belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. I had shared courtyards, shared parking lots, shared balconies, shared noise, and shared rules. If someone slammed a door late at night, I heard it. If someone smoked outside, the smell entered my unit. If I wanted to plant something or change anything, there was always a lease, a landlord, or a management company between me and the decision. When I finally saved enough money to buy a house, I was not looking for luxury. I was looking for ownership. The house needed work. The kitchen cabinets were outdated. The guest bathroom had an old vanity. The garage door opener made a terrible grinding noise every morning. None of that bothered me. The backyard was quiet. It sat lower than Grant's neighboring property, with a natural grade that had existed for years. After rain, water moved gently across the grass and continued toward a shallow drainage easement behind the lots. It never rushed toward the house. It never collected on the patio. It never cut channels into the flower bed. During my home inspection, the inspector had explained that I should keep the drainage path clear and avoid changes that would block the natural flow of water. I listened carefully because I understood that drainage problems could become expensive. I paid even more attention to the boundary survey that came with the closing documents. That survey showed the exact shape of my lot. It showed the rear boundary, the side boundary between my property and Grant's property, the drainage easement, and the setback lines. It did not grant my neighbor permission to build on my land. It did not give the HOA authority to transfer a strip of my yard to someone else. It did not create a shared wall agreement. At the time, those details seemed technical and boring. Later, they became my shield. My father had once told me that property lines seemed unimportant only until someone wealthy, careless, or overconfident decided they were flexible. He had grown up in a rural community where people fought over fences, driveways, old access roads, and tree lines. He believed that even a friendly neighbor could forget where his property ended the moment he wanted something on the other side. I thought he was being cynical. Then Grant Whitaker moved next door. Grant arrived about a year after I bought my house. From the beginning, he treated the higher elevation of his yard like a social position. He drove a polished black SUV, wore expensive watches, hired contractors for projects that never seemed to end, and spoke constantly about property values. He was not openly rude at first. He smiled, waved, and talked about improving the street. But every conversation became a small announcement of his importance. He knew people on the HOA board. He had a landscaper who worked on high-end properties. He understood construction. He understood real estate. He understood what the neighborhood needed. Grant liked rules when the rules supported him. He liked community standards when they gave him authority over somebody else. He liked property values when they allowed him to describe his preferences as a public service. I remained polite. I was not looking for conflict. I mowed my lawn, watered my plants, repaired my sprinkler system when it needed attention, and trimmed the maple branches that extended over my side of the yard. The flower bed near the rear slope became part of my morning routine. I planted purple salvia, yellow coreopsis, and a few low shrubs that could tolerate the sun. Before work, I often stepped outside with coffee and watched the light move through the maple leaves. The yard was not spectacular, it was simply mine. Grant never seemed to understand why that mattered. The first time he mentioned the slope, I was pulling weeds near the flower bed. He stood on his higher lawn and said the transition between our properties looked unfinished. He suggested terracing, stonework, structured beds, and a more formal landscape design. I told him I preferred the yard the way it was. He gave a short laugh and said, personal preference was not always the best choice for property value. That was Grant in one sentence. Your choice mattered only when it agreed with his plan. Several months later, he began talking about erosion. He claimed runoff was making his yard difficult to maintain. I reminded him that his property sat above mine, and that the existing slope had drained normally for years. Grant said older drainage patterns sometimes needed improvement when homeowners upgraded their properties. Improvement was his favorite word. He replaced healthy shrubs, rebuilt his patio, installed landscape lighting, and complained during HOA meetings about backyards that looked unfinished from second-story windows. He once told another homeowner that landscaping was no longer a personal matter when it affected neighborhood standards. Linda Carver loved language like that. Linda had been HOA president for 3 years. She rarely raised her voice. She did not need to. She spoke in phrases such as harmony, consistency, long-term value, community expectations, and architectural integrity. People joked that Linda could compliment your flowers while writing a violation notice about the pot. Grant and Linda became friendly quickly. At HOA meetings, Grant sat near the front. Linda called on him often. He volunteered with the Architectural Review Committee and brought polished sketches of his backyard plans. I noticed their relationship, but I did not believe it would affect my property. That was my mistake. I assumed HOA approval concerned paint colors, fence styles, visible sheds, and exterior modifications. I did not imagine the board would support a project near a private boundary without confirming where that boundary was. The warning signs appeared slowly. One afternoon, I noticed small wooden stakes on the slope between our yards. A yellow string connected 2 of them, and orange ribbon marked another. At first, the stakes appeared to be on Grant's side, so I assumed his landscaper was preparing a project. The next day, there were more stakes. Some of them seemed closer to my flower bed. When I asked Grant about them, he said he planned to build a retaining wall to stabilize the slope. He described it as tasteful, professionally designed, and beneficial to both properties. I asked whether he had obtained a boundary survey. Grant said his contractor knew what he was doing. That was not an answer. I asked again. He smiled and told me to relax because he was not stealing my yard. The way he said it made me uneasy. I explained that I had no objection to work performed entirely on his property. I only wanted the wall to remain on his side of the line. Grant claimed the boundary was more complicated than I understood because of the slope and the drainage easement. He added that homeowners sometimes became emotional about dirt they never used. I looked at the flowers I had planted, the grass I maintained, the sprinkler heads I replaced, and the maple tree I had watered through dry summers. It was not unused dirt. It was my property. I went inside and retrieved the survey from my closing documents. The line was clear. The drainage easement was limited. Nothing in the document gave Grant the right to build on my land or redirect water toward my house. I photographed the survey with my phone and saved the images. Over the next several days, construction materials appeared on Grant's property. Pallets of concrete blocks, bags of gravel, black drainage pipe, wooden forms, a small excavator bearing the logo of Stone Ridge Outdoor Works. I emailed Linda and asked whether the HOA had approved a retaining wall near my property line. She responded that Grant had submitted an exterior improvement request for a landscape wall intended to improve visual appearance and erosion control. I asked whether the HOA had reviewed a survey or confirmed that the wall would remain entirely on Grant's land. Linda replied that property line disputes were civil matters between homeowners. She said the board had no reason to believe the project violated the governing documents and reminded me that residents should not interfere with approved improvements. Her response troubled me. The HOA had approved the project but had not checked the property line. The HOA claimed it did not handle boundary disputes but expected me not to interfere. The HOA wanted authority without responsibility. That was when I began saving every message. A few evenings later, Mrs. Bennett, who lived 2 houses away, approached me near the mailbox. Her second-story window overlooked the rear yards. She asked whether I knew that one of Grant's workers had moved a stake closer to my flower bed. She had noticed a worker reset the string after Grant came outside and pointed down the slope. I asked whether she was certain. Mrs. Bennett said she had not been watching continuously, but the change was visible from her window. She advised me to photograph everything before excavation began. That evening I documented the slope carefully. I photographed the stakes, the string, the flower bed, the sprinkler heads, the maple tree, and the distance from several fixed objects to the marked work area. I did not cross onto Grant's property. I did not touch the stakes. I only recorded what I could see from my own yard. Grant came outside while I was taking pictures. He asked whether I was building a legal case. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I told him I was documenting my property before construction near the boundary. Grant called that dramatic. He assured me that when the project was finished, my side would look better too. My side. He spoke as if improving my land without permission was a favor. The following morning, Stone Ridge began digging. Initially, the excavation appeared close to the string line. Workers removed soil from Grant's side and stacked blocks near the upper slope. I watched from my kitchen window, uncomfortable but still hoping the wall would stay where it belonged. By afternoon, the trench looked deeper. By evening, the yellow string was gone. Fresh dirt had scattered into the edge of my flower bed. One of the stakes I photographed the previous night had disappeared. Another seemed closer to the maple tree. I did not confront anyone. I took more photographs. Rain arrived that night. It was not a severe storm, but it was enough to darken the soil and cover the construction materials with water. Before going to bed, I stood at the back door and looked at the open trench. I remember thinking that I should call the county the next morning. I remember thinking I should ask Grant for the permit number. I also remember wondering whether I was overreacting. Then I woke to the sound of water striking the patio harder than usual. When I opened the blinds, the wall was already there. At first, I tried to convince myself it was unfinished. Perhaps the blocks had been placed temporarily. Perhaps the rain made the structure appear closer. Perhaps the workers would adjust the line later. Then I stepped outside. The base of the wall cut directly through the back of my flower bed. The black plastic edging was trapped beneath the first row of blocks. Several plants were buried beneath mud and gravel. A sprinkler head had been broken away from its pipe. Soil had been removed around the maple tree. The drainage pipe was worse. It ran behind the wall and ended near my side of the slope. Water flowed from the open end, crossed the grass, and moved toward the patio. Before the wall, rainfall had spread naturally across the slope. After the wall, the runoff was being collected and released through one concentrated outlet. I began recording. I stated the date, time, address, and weather conditions. I filmed the wall, the destroyed flowers, the damaged sprinkler, the exposed tree root, the drainage pipe, and the path the water followed toward my house. Grant appeared moments later. He stood above the wall, carrying coffee, and looking pleased with the project. I demanded that the work stop until the boundary could be confirmed. Grant claimed the wall was not on my property. He said it followed the natural slope and that his contractor had verified the work area. I asked what survey had been used. He said Stone Ridge knew how to build retaining walls. Again, it was not an answer. 2 Stone Ridge workers approached. One carried a shovel, the other held a level. I asked the crew lead whether he had a copy of a licensed survey. He looked at Grant before responding. Then he said the homeowner had provided the layout. I pointed out that Grant was not licensed to survey my property. The worker said nothing. Grant stepped in and explained that the wall had to extend down the slope to prevent an unstable strip of soil between the lots. According to him, the design was the responsible way to manage drainage and erosion. Water was flowing over my lawn while he described the project as responsible. I asked why the pipe was discharging toward my patio. The crew lead explained that retaining walls required drainage to relieve pressure. I told him I understood the need for drainage. What I did not accept was drainage directed onto my property. Grant claimed the water had always flowed downhill and said they were merely managing it. That was his strategy. Create a new problem, connect it to an old natural condition, and call the result management. I pointed out that the wall had transformed a broad, shallow flow into a concentrated stream. Grant told me I was not an engineer. I told him he was not authorized to build on my land. His expression hardened. He said the wall had HOA approval. Linda had reviewed the project. It would stabilize the slope, increase property values, and prevent future washout. I reminded him that HOA approval did not change the property line. Grant dismissed my survey as old paperwork and said the HOA understood community needs better than one homeowner staring at a document. Linda arrived before the argument ended. She looked at Grant, the wall, and then me. Her expression suggested she had already decided which person was reasonable. Linda repeated that the board had approved a landscape improvement intended to stabilize the slope and maintain neighborhood appearance. She said retaining walls could look disruptive during construction, but become beneficial after completion. I asked whether the board had reviewed the property survey. Linda said the HOA did not resolve private boundary disputes. I asked why the HOA approved a wall near a private boundary without confirming where the boundary was. She said property line placement was the homeowner's responsibility. Then I asked why the HOA was warning me not to interfere if the project was purely Grant's responsibility. Her tone became sharper. Linda said homeowners must not obstruct approved work or disturb erosion control measures. If I did anything that contributed to slope failure or drainage damage, I could be fined or held liable. The contradiction was perfect. The HOA had authority when it wanted my compliance. It had no responsibility when I asked about my property. I showed her the broken sprinkler. She said contractors usually repaired minor disturbances after a project. I showed her the crushed flowers. She said landscaping could be restored. I showed her the drainage pipe. She said construction sites often required temporary water management. I told her the wall was on my land. She called that an unverified civil claim. The proof was directly beneath her umbrella. I asked Linda to order a temporary pause until the boundary was measured. She refused. The board could not stop an approved project based on an unverified allegation. Grant told the Stone Ridge crew to continue. By the afternoon, the wall was chest-high from my lower side. From Grant's upper lawn, it looked expensive and finished. From my yard, it looked like a concrete barrier pushed downhill into my property. The workers installed capstones, packed gravel behind the blocks, and raked Grant's side clean. My side remained covered with mud, broken stems, damaged irrigation components, and construction debris. The drainage outlet continued dripping toward my patio. I emailed Linda again and copied the HOA board. I included photographs and explained that the wall appeared to encroach on my property, that construction had damaged my irrigation system and landscaping, and that runoff was being concentrated toward my home. I requested that the HOA suspend any enforcement support until a licensed survey and county inspection could determine whether the wall was legal. 2 hours later, I received a formal notice from the HOA compliance address. The subject line accused me of interfering with an approved erosion control improvement. The notice stated that homeowners were prohibited from obstructing authorized contractors, damaging drainage features, disturbing retaining structures, or taking actions that could contribute to slope instability. It warned of fines, enforcement action, and possible liability. I read it twice. Grant had built over the line. His contractor had damaged my property. His drainage pipe was sending water toward my patio, and the HOA had threatened me. I saved the email, downloaded the attachment, took screenshots, and forwarded copies to a separate account. Then, I went outside and recorded the water again. My voice was calmer this time because the situation had changed. I was no longer trying to convince Grant or Linda to behave reasonably. I was building a record. That evening, Mrs. Bennett came to my front door carrying her phone. She had taken 2 photographs from her upstairs window. The first showed the original yellow string higher on the slope. The second, taken after Grant spoke with the crew, showed the string removed and the trench cut lower toward my flower bed. She was worried about becoming involved, but she sent me the original files with their timestamps. I thanked her and saved them immediately. Then I checked the security camera over my patio. The camera had not been installed for property disputes, and it did not capture the entire slope, but its view included the flower bed, part of Grant's yard, and the area where the string had been placed. I reviewed hours of footage. At 4:18 in the afternoon on the day before construction, Grant walked outside and spoke with the crew lead. He pointed down the slope toward my flower bed. The crew lead looked toward my house and shook his head once. Grant pointed again. A worker removed one stake, repositioned it lower on the hill, and took down the yellow string. The next morning, the excavator dug along the new line. The footage had no useful audio, but the sequence was clear. The original work line existed. Grant intervened. The line moved. The excavation followed the new position. I exported the entire clip. Then I created separate screenshots showing the string before Grant arrived. Grant pointing downhill, the worker moving the stake, and the excavator digging along the altered line. That was the moment the situation stopped looking like an honest mistake. They had not accidentally wandered over the boundary. The layout had been changed. The next day, heavy rain exposed the drainage problem completely. Water collected behind the wall and poured from the black pipe in a steady stream. It cut a muddy channel through the lawn, moved around the broken sprinkler line, and spread across the patio. The flower bed began washing away. Water collected around the exposed maple root. I recorded the conditions every hour. Grant watched from his covered patio. At one point, he told me I was exaggerating the situation. I asked whether he planned to redirect the pipe. He said the water had to go somewhere. When I told him it could not go toward my patio, he suggested that I improve my drainage. That sentence made my hands shake. He had altered the slope, installed the wall, concentrated the runoff, directed the outlet toward my house, and then described my yard as defective because it received the water. By evening, mud covered the edge of my patio. The sprinkler system was unusable, the flower bed was destroyed, and the maple root remained exposed. Grant's side looked clean and elevated. Mine looked like the back of somebody else's construction project. From his patio, the wall looked like an improvement. From mine, it looked like theft. The next morning, Stone Ridge returned to finish the capstones. I asked the crew lead for the permit number and the survey used for the layout. He directed me to Grant. I asked whether the company had independently verified the boundary before digging. He said the crew had built according to the homeowner-approved layout. Grant appeared and accused me of harassing the workers. I told him I was asking basic questions about work that had damaged my property. He said my property ended where the usable slope ended. I told him my property ended where the deed and recorded survey said it ended. He dismissed that as a technicality. Linda sent another email that afternoon. She said the HOA encouraged respectful resolution between neighbors and repeated that any boundary disagreement should be handled privately. Privately, the same HOA had already issued an official threat against me. I responded with a single request. I instructed the association to preserve all communications, approval forms, sketches, photographs, attachments, meeting notes, and records related to Grant's wall. Linda did not answer. Grant texted me less than an hour later. He said I was taking the issue too far. The wall improved both properties. I should not make the situation expensive. I saved that message too. The cost had begun when he built concrete across the line, but he wanted everyone to believe the cost began when I objected. That night, I stood on the patio after the rain ended. The wall loomed beneath the porch light. The flower bed was mud. The pipe continued dripping long after the storm. Part of me wanted to pull the pipe away. Part of me wanted to remove the blocks. Part of me wanted to shovel the gravel back onto Grant's property. But that was exactly what the HOA notice was designed to provoke. One angry action from me would give them a new story. They would claim I damaged a retaining structure. They would say I blocked drainage. They would accuse me of causing instability. The entire dispute would shift from Grant's decision to my reaction. So I touched nothing. I filmed the wall. I photographed the damage. I backed up the camera footage. I saved every message. Then I unfolded my survey on the kitchen table and looked at the legal line on paper. Grant had built first because he believed the finished wall would be too expensive and inconvenient to challenge. He expected the weight of the structure to become his strongest argument. I decided to make the evidence stronger. I created a folder on my computer called Retaining Wall Evidence. Inside it, I created separate folders for photographs, videos, HOA messages, Grant's texts, security footage, survey documents, contractor activity, drainage damage, county records, and expenses. Organization may not feel dramatic, but once someone begins rewriting reality while the concrete is still wet, organization becomes survival. I saved Linda's first email approving the landscape wall. I saved her second message saying the HOA did not handle property disputes. I saved the enforcement notice accusing me of interfering. Those documents belonged together. They showed the association claiming distance from the boundary while using its authority to protect Grant's project. I saved Grant's text as a screenshot and as a PDF. I conducted a complete video walkthrough of the yard. I recorded the date, time, weather, address, and condition of every damaged area. I stated clearly that I had not moved the pipe, altered the wall, disturbed the gravel, or removed any blocks. I wanted the record to establish that the condition later inspected by the county was the condition left by Grant and Stone Ridge. I took wide photographs to show context, close photographs to show damage, and measurements to show scale. I placed a tape beside the crushed flower bed, the broken irrigation pipe, the mud line on the patio, and the exposed maple root. I did not use my tape measure to claim the legal boundary. I understood that only a licensed surveyor could establish that, but the photographs would show the size and location of the damage. Then I studied the closing survey. The boundary between our properties ran at a slight angle. The slope and lack of a fence made that angle difficult to judge by sight, but the recorded measurements were clear. The drainage easement did not make the entire slope communal property. It did not give Grant a right to place a structure on my land. It did not allow him to direct water toward my patio. I scanned the survey and saved copies in multiple locations. Next, I created a timeline. I listed the day Grant first mentioned a retaining wall, the day I saw the stakes, the day I emailed Linda, the day Mrs. Bennett saw the string moved, the day I photographed the original layout, the day excavation started, the morning the wall appeared, the time the HOA warning arrived, and the time Grant sent his text. Beside each entry, I listed the corresponding file. A pile of photographs can look confusing. A timeline turns them into a story. Then I called the county building department. I explained that my neighbor had built a concrete block retaining wall on a sloped boundary, that the structure appeared to cross my property line, that it included a drainage pipe discharging toward my patio, and that the HOA had described it as an approved landscape project. The county employee asked how tall the wall was. I explained that parts of it appeared close to chest height from my lower side. She asked whether it retained soil. I said yes. She asked for the permit number. I told her Grant had refused to provide one. After searching by address, she found a permit application. But the description did not match what I had described. The county file listed a decorative landscape wall. It showed a low wall. It did not identify a structural retaining function. It did not include an engineered drawing. It did not include a drainage plan. It did not mention work near or across a property boundary. The employee advised me to submit photographs through the county portal and request an inspection. She explained that the county could not decide a private ownership dispute based only on my claim, but a licensed boundary survey would carry weight. I called a surveyor that afternoon. His name was Evan Price. He had spent more than 20 years measuring boundaries in residential disputes. After reviewing my closing survey, photographs, and camera stills, he gave me one instruction: do not move anything. I assured him that I had not. Evan arrived the following morning with surveying equipment, flags, stakes, and the calm manner of someone who had watched confident homeowners lose arguments to measurements many times. He began at the front of the property, located reference points, checked the recorded plat, and worked toward the backyard. Grant came outside within 10 minutes. He asked what Evan was doing. Evan explained that he was performing a boundary survey on my behalf. Grant said the line had already been considered during construction. Evan responded that considering a line was not the same as measuring it. Grant hovered nearby while Evan worked. One Stone Ridge employee also appeared and watched from the driveway. Evan ignored them. He checked each position more than once and placed bright markers along the legal boundary. When he finished, the result was worse than I expected. The wall did not merely touch my line. Several sections crossed it. The concrete base, gravel backfill, and drainage pipe extended onto my property. Near the flower bed, the encroachment exceeded 3 feet. 3 feet may sound insignificant until someone fills it with concrete, breaks your irrigation, destroys your plants, and calls the land too useless to defend. Evan did not make a dramatic announcement. He simply told me that he would prepare a formal overlay. But Grant could see the markers. One marker stood on the far side of the wall from where he expected it. Another showed that the base rested well inside my lot. Grant claimed the stakes looked wrong. Evan told him that was why surveyors used instruments rather than opinions. Grant insisted the contractor had followed the approved layout. Evan explained that an approved layout did not become a legal boundary merely because someone built on it. For the first time since the wall appeared, Grant looked uncertain. His confidence had finally been measured. I also hired Nora Ellis, a landscape drainage specialist with experience in residential grading disputes. She visited after light rain, which made the water flow visible without flooding the entire yard. She examined the pipe outlet, gravel backfill, wall base, soil cut, patio, and the channel forming through my lawn. Nora explained that the wall was collecting water behind it, concentrating the runoff, and releasing it toward the lower property, mine. Before construction, water had moved broadly and gradually across the slope. The wall had changed the hydraulic pattern. The new pipe transformed natural sheet flow into a concentrated discharge. A retaining wall needed drainage, but the outlet could not simply dump water onto another owner's usable property or toward a structure. Nora prepared a preliminary memorandum. She wrote that the wall appeared to alter surface runoff, concentrate water toward my patio, contribute to erosion, and expose the maple root to further damage. She also noted that the structure's retained soil, gravel backfill, and drainage components were inconsistent with a simple decorative wall. I submitted Evan's preliminary survey findings, Nora's drainage memorandum, photographs, videos, the HOA notice, Grant's text, camera footage, and Mrs. Bennett's time-stamped images to the county portal. Then I waited. The waiting was difficult because the wall looked more permanent each day. Grant had Stone Ridge complete the landscaping on his side. Fresh mulch covered the upper slope. New shrubs lined the capstones. The finished surface looked polished. My side still showed mud, exposed soil, broken irrigation parts, and drainage damage. Grant had taken the attractive side of the project and left me the consequences. Several days later, the county responded to my public records request. The permit file contained only 12 pages. For a wall that changed the slope, redirected water, crushed landscaping, damaged irrigation, exposed tree roots, and crossed a property line, the paperwork was remarkably simple. The application described a decorative garden wall. The sketch showed a low curved feature entirely inside Grant's lot. There was no retained slope, no gravel backfill, no drain outlet, no structural footing detail, no engineer's stamp, no boundary survey, no neighbor authorization, no plan for discharging water. On paper, the wall looked like a small feature intended to hold mulch. In reality, it held back Grant's elevated yard. That was the legal turn in the story. Grant had not received approval for the structure outside my window. He had received approval for something smaller, lower, non-structural, and entirely within his property. Then he had built the version he actually wanted. The sketch placed the wall on his side. Evan's overlay placed the real wall on mine. The permit called it decorative. Nora's memorandum described a functioning retaining structure. The permit showed no drainage outlet. My videos showed water pouring from one. Every document Grant used to obtain approval contradicted the construction itself. I forwarded the entire file to a property attorney named Marcus Hale. Marcus reviewed the survey, permit, drainage memorandum, camera footage, HOA correspondence, photographs, and text messages. His first question was whether I had touched the wall. I said no. Marcus told me that was important because the wall was still telling the truth. The base told the truth. The gravel told the truth. The broken sprinkler told the truth. The pipe outlet told the truth. The property markers told the truth. Grant was the person trying to tell a different story. Marcus sent a preservation and demand letter to Grant, Stone Ridge Outdoor Works, Linda, and the HOA board. The letter required them to preserve all contracts, sketches, communications, work logs, photographs, layout notes, permits, approvals, and electronic records related to the project. It demanded that no one alter the wall, conceal the base, move the drainage pipe, remove gravel, cover the survey markers, or perform additional work before the county inspection. It demanded reimbursement for the survey, drainage assessment, irrigation repairs, landscaping damage, tree evaluation, attorney fees, and restoration costs. Most importantly, it demanded removal of every portion of the wall, footing, gravel base, backfill, and drainage system located on my property. Linda finally attempted to call me. I did not answer. At that stage, everything needed to be in writing. She emailed instead. Her message said the HOA was reviewing the matter and had never authorized encroachment onto private property. She claimed the board had relied on the materials Grant submitted when approving an aesthetic request. Aesthetic request. Once the permit became a problem, the HOA stopped calling the wall an erosion control improvement. Grant sent a long email claiming my attorney's letter was aggressive and unnecessary. He described any possible encroachment as minor and suggested that landscaping could resolve it. He warned that removing the wall would be wasteful, expensive, and potentially dangerous. He accused me of damaging neighbor relations by insisting on strict measurements. Strict measurements were what he called my legal boundary. Marcus responded by attaching Evan's survey overlay. One color showed the recorded property line, another showed the alignment of the wall. The encroachment was obvious. Then he attached the county permit describing a decorative wall, then Nora's memorandum describing concentrated drainage, then the camera stills showing the string moved before excavation. The dispute was no longer based on two competing opinions. It had become a documented sequence. Grant obtained approval for one structure. He changed the construction layout. Stone Ridge built a different structure. The wall crossed my boundary. The drainage damaged my property. The HOA pressured me to accept it before anyone checked the facts. Marcus sent a second, stronger demand letter. He described the project with a phrase Grant would later come to hate. Unauthorized encroaching retaining structure. Not a landscape improvement. Not a garden feature. Not shared erosion control. An unauthorized encroaching retaining structure. The letter explained that the wall exceeded the scope of Grant's permit, performed a structural retaining function, included unapproved drainage components, crossed my property line, and altered runoff toward my patio. It demanded that Grant stop all work, preserve the current condition for inspection, correct the drainage hazard, and remove the encroachment under an approved plan. Grant's attorney responded 2 days later. The letter was polished and carefully worded. It claimed the boundary remained disputed. The wall provided a necessary benefit. The project had been approved in good faith, and immediate removal could create safety concerns. It also suggested that I grant an easement or sell him the narrow strip of land beneath the encroaching portion. That proposal revealed the weakness in his position. If the wall was already legally on his property, he would not need to purchase mine. Marcus advised me that I had the right to consider a sale, an easement, a license agreement, or removal. I rejected the proposal. Not because I wanted to punish Grant, because allowing the wall to remain would create permanent complications. Today, it would be 3 feet of land. Tomorrow, Grant would claim access rights to inspect the wall, then maintenance rights, then drainage rights, then liability questions, then disclosure problems if I sold the house. Then a future buyer asking why a neighbor's retaining structure occupied my lot. A small surrender on paper could become a permanent burden in real life. I had not worked for years to buy a home, so Grant Whitaker could reduce part of my property to a footnote in his landscaping plan. The answer was no. The wall had to move. The county scheduled an on-site inspection. Grant, Stone Ridge, the HOA, Marcus, Evan, Nora, and I received formal notice. The inspection would include review of the permit, boundary findings, structural characteristics, drainage conditions, and reported property damage. Linda sent an email urging everyone to remain respectful and avoid turning a private neighbor issue into a public confrontation. A private neighbor issue. That was what she called it once the county became involved. Before that, it had been an HOA-approved erosion control improvement worthy of enforcement. I printed the survey, overlay, permit, HOA messages, Grant's text, Nora's memorandum, Mrs. Bennett's photographs, camera stills, damage records, and county correspondence. I placed everything in a binder near the back door. I barely slept the night before the inspection, not because I doubted the evidence, because I knew Grant would try to talk over it. People like Grant depend on confidence. They speak until simple facts sound complicated. They use words such as shared conditions, practical solution, community benefit, minor adjustment, and unnecessary expense until everyone becomes too tired to remember the original question. But the county inspection would not be decided by confidence. It would be decided by measurement. Measurements are brutal because they do not care who sounds reasonable. They care where the line is. The inspection was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:30, Grant's backyard looked like a stage. His side of the wall had been cleaned carefully. The mulch was smooth. The shrubs were watered. The capstones were wiped down. Patio furniture had been arranged neatly. He wanted the inspector to see a beautiful finished project. My side showed the truth that landscaping could not hide. Broken irrigation components, compacted soil, crushed flower bed edging, mud stains, an exposed maple root, a drainage pipe aimed downhill. Evan arrived first and checked the survey markers. Nora examined the pipe outlet and photographed the water path. Marcus stood beside me with the binder and a legal pad. Neighbors began gathering along the rear easement and on nearby patios. Mrs. Bennett came outside. Several other homeowners appeared after hearing that the county would inspect Grant's wall. Linda arrived wearing a navy jacket and carrying a folder. 2 HOA board members followed her. Grant looked irritated by the crowd. Stone Ridge sent Derek Sloan, the crew lead, and another representative. At exactly 10, County Building Inspector Marla Jennings arrived with Code Enforcement Officer Paul Rivas. Marla did not seem impressed by the wall's appearance. She introduced herself, confirmed the permit number, and explained that the inspection would compare the approved documents with the structure as built. Grant immediately began describing the wall as a necessary erosion control feature. He said the slope created shared conditions, that the project had HOA approval, and that his contractor followed industry standards. Marla asked for the approved plan. Grant handed her the permit file. She studied the sketch and then looked at the actual wall. The difference was visible before she measured anything. The approved drawing showed a low decorative wall entirely within Grant's lot. The structure in front of her retained several feet of soil, included gravel backfill, and had a drainage pipe. Marla asked Derek whether Stone Ridge considered the wall structural. Derek tried to say the wall was primarily decorative, but also provided some slope support. Marla examined the base, the retained grade, and the drainage components. She said that a wall retaining soil and requiring pressure relief did not become decorative merely because the permit used that word. Then she asked how Stone Ridge established the construction line. Derek said the homeowner supplied the layout. Marla asked whether a licensed survey had been used. Derek said not by the company. Grant interrupted and claimed the visible slope made the intended boundary obvious. Evan stepped forward with the certified survey overlay. He explained the recorded line, reference points, field measurements, and the location of the wall relative to the boundary. Marla asked him to demonstrate. That was the moment the entire neighborhood went quiet. Evan set his equipment, confirmed the markers, and indicated the legal line. The wall crossed it in several locations. At the widest point, the base extended more than 3 feet onto my property. Marla placed a measuring rod beside the wall and recorded the encroachment. Grant objected. He said the wall followed a practical line based on the slope. Marla replied that practical landscaping preferences did not replace recorded property boundaries. He argued that the drainage easement made the area shared. Marcus provided the recorded easement language. It allowed drainage through a designated area. It did not authorize private construction on my lot. It did not grant ownership or structural rights. It did not permit concentrated discharge toward my patio. Nora explained the drainage findings. She described how the wall intercepted broad surface flow, concentrated water behind the blocks, and released it through a pipe toward the lower property. Marla followed the outlet path across the grass. She photographed the mud line, broken sprinkler components, flower bed damage, and patio staining. Grant insisted water had always moved downhill. Nora agreed that water naturally moved downhill, but explained that the wall changed how much water reached a single point and how quickly it arrived. Natural drainage had been altered into a directed discharge. Grant accused her of exaggerating. Nora produced the rainfall videos and her memorandum. The images showed water pouring from the pipe and flowing toward my patio. Grant stopped talking. Marla then reviewed the permit application line by line. The approved wall was described as low and decorative. The real wall retained soil. The approved sketch showed no drainage system. The real wall had a pipe. The approved location stayed within Grant's property. The real wall crossed the boundary. The approved materials did not include engineering documentation. The actual height and structural function required further review. Every soft description Grant had used collapsed under the comparison. Linda attempted to distance the HOA from the construction. She said the board had approved only the design presented by the homeowner and did not verify county requirements or private boundaries. Mrs. Bennett asked why the HOA had threatened me with enforcement if it had not verified the permit or the line. Linda said the board had relied on information available at the time. Mrs. Bennett asked whether the information included my photographs showing damage. Linda had no direct answer. One of the HOA board members looked down at his folder. Marla announced that the county was issuing a notice of violation and a stop work order. The permit did not authorize the retaining structure as built. The wall's location did not match the approved sketch. The construction included structural retaining features and drainage components not reflected in the permit. The survey showed apparent encroachment beyond Grant's property boundary. No additional work, concealment, expansion, or alteration could occur without county approval. Grant asked whether he could simply amend the permit. Marla explained that he could submit revised plans, but the county could not approve a private structure on land he did not own without legal permission from the owner. Marcus stated that I would not grant that permission. I did not need to say anything. The survey markers were speaking for me. Then Marla said the sentence that changed the entire balance of power. The encroaching portions would have to be removed or reconstructed outside the neighboring property line. Grant looked stunned. He argued that removal might destabilize the slope. Marla explained that any removal would require an engineered corrective plan and temporary stabilization measures, but the existing condition could not remain merely because fixing it would be expensive. That sentence destroyed Grant's strategy. Build first. Make the project look finished. Make removal costly. Then argue that restoring the boundary is unreasonable. The county did not accept that logic. Paul Rivas from Code Enforcement requested Stone Ridge's contract, daily logs, layout notes, photographs, contractor license information, insurance details, and communications with Grant. Derek attempted to place responsibility on the homeowner. He said Grant had provided the layout and requested field adjustments. Paul asked whether Stone Ridge had verified those adjustments against a survey. Derek admitted it had not. The camera footage showed the stakes being moved. The permit showed a different wall. The survey showed the encroachment. The drainage evidence showed the damage. There was nowhere left to hide responsibility. Marla required immediate temporary measures to prevent additional discharge toward my patio. She prohibited any work that would cover the base or survey markers and ordered Grant to submit a compliant corrective plan. She handed him the printed violation notice. He stared at it as if paper had betrayed him. I remembered the way he had dismissed my survey as old paperwork. Now official paperwork was the only thing that mattered. Linda tried to reassure the gathered homeowners that the HOA would cooperate fully. She said the board had approved only what Grant submitted and reminded everyone that homeowners were responsible for complying with county rules. Mrs. Bennett asked why the HOA had warned the damaged homeowner rather than the homeowner whose wall crossed the line. Nobody answered. Grant repeated that the dispute concerned only a narrow strip of land. Paul looked at the survey markers and told him that land did not become less owned because someone else considered it narrow. The inspection ended with the wall under a stop work order, the contractor under review, the HOA publicly embarrassed, and Grant holding a violation notice in front of neighbors who had heard every finding. For the first time, he could not control the story. The records controlled it. Grant's attorney contacted Marcus within days. The proposal was predictable. Grant wanted to preserve as much of the wall as possible. He offered to purchase the encroached strip, pay for landscaping, repair the sprinkler, and create an easement allowing the structure and drainage system to remain. I refused again. Grant's tone changed. He argued that removal would be extremely expensive. Engineering would take time. Contractors had scheduling problems. Weather might delay the project. County requirements were excessive for what he continued to call a minor issue, but the county did not treat it as minor. Marla required an engineered plan for any replacement wall. The plan had to show the structure entirely on Grant's property. It needed footing details, backfill specifications, drainage design, outlet location, slope stabilization, temporary erosion controls, and a construction access plan. No footing could cross my boundary. No gravel could cross my boundary. No drainage outlet could direct water toward my patio. No worker or equipment could enter my yard without written permission. No landscaping could conceal the survey markers until final inspection. Grant had built quickly and conveniently. Now he had to rebuild slowly, correctly, and under supervision. Stone Ridge also faced consequences. The company initially claimed it followed the homeowner's instructions, but the permit described a decorative wall. The completed project was structural. The survey showed an encroachment. The camera showed the layout changing. The drainage pipe had been installed without verifying where the water would discharge. Paul requested the company's complete file. Stone Ridge's insurer became involved because the claim included unauthorized work, property damage, irrigation damage, landscaping loss, tree root injury, drainage alteration, and potential professional negligence. The company's communications became formal. Its representatives stopped making casual statements. Its workers stopped parking near my house. 3 weeks after the public inspection, the removal began. Marla required county supervision on the first day because the wall retained soil and the encroaching section had to be removed without causing additional damage. Grant hired an engineer, a different excavation crew, and a landscape restoration company. Stone Ridge did not perform the removal. Mrs. Bennett later told me that Grant and Derek had argued in the driveway before the new crew arrived. I did not ask for details. The consequences were visible enough. On the morning of removal, Evan marked the property line again. Nora inspected the temporary drainage controls. Marla stood nearby with a tablet. Paul photographed the site. Marcus joined me on the patio. Grant stood on his upper lawn with his arms folded. The crew began by removing the capstones. One by one, the clean, finished pieces came off. Then the upper blocks. Then the gravel. Then the lower rows that had crushed my flower bed. Every block removed made the wall look less like an improvement and more like what it had been from the beginning. A mistake stacked neatly. When the crew reached the portion on my land, the hidden damage became visible. The soil was heavily compacted. The landscape edging was destroyed. The irrigation line had been crushed in 2 locations, not one. Gravel had been driven deep into the planting bed. The maple root showed abrasions from the excavation equipment. The slope had been cut unevenly. Water had carved a narrow channel around the former pipe outlet. Marla photographed everything. Paul added the conditions to his report. Marcus added them to the damage claim. Grant watched while the crew uncovered the cost of his decision. At one point he complained that removal was causing more damage than the wall. Nora reminded him that the removal was necessary because of where he placed the wall. He had no response. By the end of the first day, the encroaching portion was gone. The exposed soil looked rough and unfinished, but it was honest. There was no concrete pretending to belong there. Reconstruction began several days later on Grant's side of the line. This time, every stage was different. Evan confirmed the footing location before concrete was placed. The engineer redesigned the slope. The new wall was lower near the boundary. The footing and gravel base stayed entirely inside Grant's property. Filter fabric and proper backfill were installed. The drainage line was routed to an approved discharge location on Grant's land, away from my patio. Temporary erosion control barriers protected the exposed soil. County inspectors photographed and approved each critical stage. Grant's replacement wall was smaller. It was less dramatic. It did not give him as much level yard as the first one, but it was legal. My property was restored separately. The irrigation system was repaired and tested. Contaminated gravel was removed from the planting bed. The soil was loosened and regraded. A certified arborist evaluated the maple tree and recommended root protection, mulch, and monitoring. The destroyed edging was replaced. New plants went into the flower bed. The slope was restored so water could move naturally toward the designated drainage area rather than collecting against the patio. The financial settlement required Grant and the contractor's insurer to cover the survey, drainage assessment, sprinkler repair, landscape restoration, arborist evaluation, county fees, and a substantial portion of my legal expenses. Grant also had to pay for his first wall, its removal, the engineer, the corrective plan, the second excavation crew, the replacement wall, inspections, and restoration work. I never learned the exact total of everything he paid. I did not need to. The project he had called a simple improvement cost him far more than respecting the boundary would have cost. Stone Ridge faced a separate review involving its insurance carrier, contractor records, permit compliance, and construction practices. The company lost credibility within the subdivision. Several homeowners who had considered hiring it canceled consultations after learning what happened. Grant blamed Stone Ridge. Stone Ridge blamed Grant's layout instructions. The HOA blamed the documents Grant submitted. Linda blamed confusion. But responsibility did not disappear merely because everyone divided it into smaller pieces. The camera showed what Grant did. The contractor built without independent boundary verification. The HOA threatened me without verifying the facts. Each party had made a choice. Each party paid for that choice differently. After the work was complete, the county performed a final inspection. Marla checked the new wall location, drainage system, grading, and restoration. Evan confirmed that the structure stayed inside Grant's property. Nora verified that the outlet no longer directed concentrated flow toward my yard. The county closed the violation only after the corrective work passed inspection. Marcus required a written agreement stating that Grant would not place future walls, drains, grading changes, landscaping structures, or construction materials on my property without permission. Any work within a specified distance of the boundary would require survey verification. The agreement also confirmed that I had granted no easement, maintenance right, drainage right, license, or ownership interest to Grant. The line was restored legally as well as physically. Then the rain came again. I stood at the back door and watched it. Water no longer poured from a black pipe toward my patio. It no longer cut through the flower bed. It no longer pooled around the sprinkler line. It moved gently across the slope and continued toward the drainage easement, just as it had before the wall. The patio stayed clear except for ordinary rain. The new flowers bent in the wind but remained in the soil. The maple leaves shook above the restored bed. I watched water behave normally for a long time. That may sound insignificant, but after someone changes your land without permission, normal things begin to feel like justice. The HOA still had to face its own reckoning. Linda tried to defend the board by saying it had approved only the materials Grant submitted and was not responsible for enforcing county permits or confirming private boundaries. That explanation might have worked if the HOA had remained neutral. It had not. The association sent me a warning accusing me of interfering with an erosion control improvement before it verified the permit. It threatened the homeowner whose property had been invaded instead of questioning the homeowner whose wall crossed the line. It used official language to protect Grant's project, and then called the dispute private when the project became legally inconvenient. At the next HOA meeting, the room was full. Homeowners brought copies of the warning, the county violation, the permit sketch, and the survey findings. Mrs. Bennett asked whether the board had reviewed Grant's actual county permit before describing the wall as an erosion control project. Another homeowner asked whether anyone on the architectural committee had the qualifications to evaluate retaining walls or drainage systems. Someone else asked why projects near property lines did not require surveys. Linda gave careful answers. She said the HOA relied on homeowner submissions. She said owners remained responsible for county compliance. She said the board did not function as a permitting agency. She said the association regretted any confusion. Then Mrs. Bennett asked the question Linda could not answer. If the HOA did not verify the permit or the boundary, why did it threaten the person whose yard was damaged? The room became silent. That silence did more damage to Linda's authority than an argument would have. A board member named Daniel Cho finally said the HOA had overstepped. It should not have issued an enforcement warning without determining whether the wall was legally built or properly located. He proposed a new policy. Any significant project within 5 feet of a property boundary would require a current survey or boundary verification. If county approval was required, the permit had to be attached. Affected neighbors had to receive written notice. Every HOA approval would include a statement explaining that association approval did not authorize encroachment, drainage discharge, easement expansion, trespass, or violation of county code. The homeowners applauded. The policy passed unanimously. Then the board voted to withdraw the enforcement notice against me completely. Not postpone it, not mark it resolved. Withdraw it. Marcus had insisted on that language because I did not want a false violation sitting in the HOA file when I eventually sold the house. I had not interfered with a legal improvement. I had protected my property from an unauthorized structure. A month later, Linda lost the HOA presidency. She remained on the board temporarily, but her influence was gone. Homeowners stopped accepting polished language as proof. They asked for documents, permit numbers, surveys, and written authority. Grant also lost the status he had enjoyed in the neighborhood. Before the wall dispute, he spoke at meetings as if he represented common sense and property value. After the inspection, people remembered that he had moved a construction line, built beyond his permit, damaged another owner's land, and tried to make the finished wall too expensive to challenge. He became quieter. He stopped commenting on other people's landscaping. He stopped describing neighboring yards as unfinished. The height of his lawn no longer seemed like a position of authority. For several months, we barely acknowledged each other. That suited me. I did not need an apology to know what happened. An apology would not have restored the flower bed, repaired the sprinkler, corrected the drainage, or moved the wall. Records had done that. Measurements had done that. The law had done that. One morning, long after the county closed the case, I sat on the patio with coffee. The maple tree had survived. New growth appeared along the branches. The restored flower bed was smaller than before, while the plants established themselves, but color had returned to the slope. The property markers were no longer visible from the patio, yet I knew exactly where the boundary was. So did Grant. The new wall stood several feet away on his side, lower and less imposing than the first structure. Its drainage system disappeared toward the approved outlet instead of pointing at my house. The yard felt like mine again. Not because it looked exactly as it had before, because someone had tried to redefine it and failed. I often thought about how easily the outcome could have changed. Had I pulled the drainage pipe away, the HOA might have accused me of causing the flooding. Had I removed a block, Grant might have claimed I destabilized the wall. Had I accepted the association's authority without checking the permit, the structure might still be on my land. Had Mrs. Bennett not taken photographs, Grant might have described the altered construction line as an innocent mistake. Had the security camera not captured the stake movement, Stone Ridge and Grant could have blamed each other indefinitely. Had I not kept my closing survey, I might have spent weeks doubting what I owned. Had I accepted money for the narrow strip, I might have created permanent maintenance and drainage rights that followed the property long after Grant or I moved away. The most important decision I made was not dramatic. I did not shout louder. I did not threaten anyone. I did not destroy the wall. I did not block the pipe. I did not trespass onto Grant's lawn. I left the evidence exactly where it was and let the wall tell the truth. People like Grant often depend on exhaustion. They assume that if they build quickly, speak confidently, invoke the HOA, and make correction expensive, the other homeowner will surrender. They count on the victim becoming emotional. They count on the paperwork being difficult. They count on officials being too busy. They count on neighbors remaining silent. They count on concrete feeling more permanent than ownership. But concrete is not stronger than a recorded boundary. Confidence is not stronger than a permit file. An HOA approval is not stronger than county code. And a finished project does not become legal simply because removing it costs money. Grant thought the wall would settle the argument. Instead, it preserved the evidence. The base showed the encroachment. The gravel showed the construction footprint. The pipe showed the drainage change. The broken sprinkler showed the damage. The camera showed the altered layout. The permit showed the deception. The survey showed the line. And when the county inspector measured everything in front of the neighborhood, Grant finally had to stand beside the facts he had spent weeks dismissing. I did not win because I had more money. I did not win because I knew powerful people. I did not win because the HOA favored me. I won because I understood one simple principle. When someone crosses a boundary and expects you to react emotionally, the most powerful response is often to preserve the evidence, understand your rights, and let the official record speak before the other side has time to rewrite what happened. Grant wanted 3 feet of my yard because he believed I would treat it like dirt. I treated it like property. That was the difference. And every time rain now moves quietly across the restored slope, I remember the morning I first saw that wall and felt as if my backyard had become smaller overnight. The yard is not smaller anymore. Grant's wall is gone from my land. The drainage is corrected. The flowers are growing again. The HOA warning has been withdrawn. Linda no longer controls the board. Stone Ridge's involvement became an insurance and code enforcement problem. Grant paid to remove the structure he once said I should thank him for, all because he believed building first would make the property line negotiable. It did not. The line had always been there. The only thing that changed was that, in the end, everyone was forced to see it.